Joseph Henri Georges Meunier was born in 1869 in Saint-Cloud, a few miles west of Paris. His early fascination for drawing and painting led him in his later teens to study at the National School of Fine Arts in the capital, followed by more at the city's School for Decorative Arts. He went to work for the journal L'Echo de Versailles in 1889, but no visual evidence of his illustration work appears until 1894, when at the age of 25 he began working at the highly successful and respected Rire printing and publishing house. In that year he created this appealing and accomplished lithographic poster for Job's cigarette papers, and to avoid confusion I should point out that the year 1889 on this poster refers to a trade fair award received earlier by the company. I also found this image of just the blue colour run, giving a clear idea of just how painstaking this print process was. Prior to his arrival at Rire, the undisputed master of French poster art of the period, Jules Rire, had been the company's principal poster artist, and the obvious Rire influence evident in Meunier's own approach made him a natural successor. But having said that, such was the pervasive power of Rire's groundbreaking poster art at the time that there were many others in Paris exhibiting similar levels of the same influence in the hope of greater success. And just like Rire and virtually all his contemporaries, Meunier made frequent use of attractive young women as the primary focus of his posters, and they would continue to be a dominant feature of the large volume of others he created in the wake of the success of the Job poster. Such frivolous and mildly erotic images were well suited to, and could even be fairly said to have defined, the prevailing mood of the Parisian Belle Époque. Because of the serious levels of interest in and respect for poster design as an art form in itself throughout most of Europe, but particularly in Paris, Meunier's creations were regularly reprinted in journals and exhibited at a number of Parisian salons, side by side with the best of the period, including both Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and Théophile Steinlen. He was conspicuously prolific in this period, and despite the almost statutory use of female models in so much of his output, the actual individual designs were considerably more varied than that of many of his more formulaic contemporaries. And the images he created were put to commercial use for the widest possible range of clients and products, from the most glamorous and sophisticated, including many for theatrical productions, all the way down to the mundane and everyday. In 1896, Meunier ventured into bookwork with a series of illustrations for Émile Goudeau's Paris Almanac. This was an annually published light-hearted guide to the many attractions of Parisian life, and Meunier's mademoiselles were used to decorate the pages and give the book a more human and quietly suggestive dimension than more scenic image-making. But other than this commission at the time, it continued to be the creation of posters which occupied his time. And alongside his continuing Rire-influenced images, he also explored other graphic approaches, ranging from the more flat graphic to more painterly creations, such as this swirling figurative piece promoting the Folie Bergère performer Loire Fuller. But in 1899 he also began working regularly for the humour magazine Rire, with colour covers and some page monochromes, quite a few of which were considerably more sexually suggestive than any of his poster work had been. By the turn of the century, his full-time position at the Rire printing house was at an end, although Meunier did continue to create posters, even if with far less frequency, which were also now featuring more conspicuously humorous content, and the Rire influence had evaporated. Whether he had by now taken up full-time employment at Rire or was working for the magazine on a freelance basis, I've been unable to find out. But for the next couple of years at least, the visual evidence confirms that this was almost exclusively his sole vehicle of expression, and his generally upbeat, inconsequential social and sometimes sexually themed humour was precisely what the magazine and its readers wanted from its contributors, leaving more serious-minded political satire for others to worry about. Among the many predominantly colour illustrations he was producing for the magazine was this complex image titled The Parade of Spring, which required it to be a separate folded element due to its extremely landscape format. And in addition to his page illustrations and jokes, he appeared with great frequency on the covers, all of which demonstrated his facility for light inconsequential humour and frivolous eroticism in roughly equal measure. By this point there was no doubt that Meunier was among Rire's most prized contributors and a considerable factor in their increasing popularity in a competitive market. Not long into the new century, his work for Rire started to attract other magazine commissions, including a whole edition of the rival L'Assiette au Beurre, presented as a non-too-serious visual exploration on the theme of love, titled Qu'est-ce que c'est? These images were far from typical of Meunier's other work and were quite noticeably reminiscent of the gestural orientally influenced style of Toulouse-Lautrec's posters. Whether this was some kind of stylistic homage or satire, I have no idea, but it was the only example of its kind he created during his entire career. And around the same time, his ubiquitous magazine presence and popularity led to the production of several humorous scenarios of aspects of contemporary French life reproduced as limited editions of around only 100 lithographs. This would have given them the same collectible status as more serious-minded, self-consciously art-driven lithographs, and it would certainly have only been the members of Paris's middle classes, the bourgeoisie, who could afford such a thing to grace their walls. But occasional departures such as this were fairly rare, and it was undoubtedly his commitment to Rire which dominated his output. Up to this point, Rire had been printed using traditional lithography, just as his posters had been, but it seems it wasn't Meunier himself who prepared the printed artwork. On many of the images, the credit appears for Wartime and Company, a well-respected lithography firm. And in the same way that engravers had also signed the work they transcribed from originals by Victorian illustrators, Wartime were also taking joint credit for the printed images. It's a guess on my part, but it's most likely the originals were created as pen and wash by Meunier, and then recreated by print technicians as a series of separate elements on stone for each colour run. But it was around this time the name of Monsieur Bertin suddenly disappeared, and Meunier's sketchy line and light wash originals were being reproduced by the increasingly popular, if expensive, photolithographic process direct from his originals. His previous dedication to the use of pretty females on his posters had by now largely given way to broader comedic imagery, and in 1904 the increasingly popular pursuit of motoring also found its way into a couple of good-natured humorous posters, with absolutely nothing in common with his earlier poster work. And another more manically comic example followed just a year later. Not all were motoring themed, and in 1906 there was even a return to his earlier Belle Époque styling for a fête in his hometown, Saint-Cloud, among a wide range of others, each of which highlighted one of the many versatile approaches which now constituted his creative armoury, each bearing little resemblance to those that preceded or followed them. All his magazine work, occasional posters and the publication of limited edition prints continued to keep Meunier busy into the second decade of the century, and all of it was possessed of a largely inconsequential good cheer well suited to the times. But when France went to war against Germany in 1914, the change of tone in his work, and that of many of his contemporaries, was immediate and plain to see. Not long after the war began, with huge numbers of casualties on both sides, Rire changed its name to Le Rire Rouge as a reference to the bloodshed. And Meunier's work for the magazine immediately shifted to war-themed image creation, some of which was purely patriotic, but there was also more overtly propagandist work produced, with some bitter visual condemnations of the Kaiser and his war machine. Not only did his work appear frequently in Le Rire Rouge throughout the conflict, but from 1915 onwards he also featured in La Bayonnette, a satirical magazine created specifically to address the subject of the war and act as a morale booster and platform for patriotic, staunchly anti-German propaganda. And it may have come as somewhat of a surprise to many, and possibly even Meunier himself, that someone who had devoted his entire career to date exclusively to frivolity and sexual innuendo was suddenly capable of creating some of the most visually eloquent and graphically compelling illustration produced during this terrible, pointless war. His work appeared in both colour and monochrome, and it was all defined by the conspicuous energy and three-dimensional plausibility of his fine expressive pen crosshatch technique. And when washes of transparent colour were applied, Meunier used them to create equally plausible dramatic lighting effects, which enhanced the images considerably. Symbolic figures representing the forces of good and a fair share of representations of evil and brutality littered the images he created, and even if the specifics might be lost on contemporary viewers, the underlying message can still be clearly understood. For 4 years he was relentless in his production of these images, which successfully conveyed anger, sorrow and bleak gallows humour by turns, and when viewed sequentially they constitute an astonishing visual record of this particularly barbaric war that's as valid and poignant as any other I can think of from the time. Germany finally surrendered in 1918 and peace was restored across all Europe. But it seems that Meunier had lost the will to carry on as before. What visual evidence there is strongly suggests that he was no longer working for Rire, although I did find this isolated example from the magazine Fantasio. But otherwise all I could find were a few more posters, the last of which was this comical example published in 1925. And the only other work I found suggests that he perhaps spent his later years as an artist. But all I can tell you with any certainty is that Georges Meunier died in 1942 at the age of 73. It's possible, of course, that he just figured he had made enough money and could retire in comfort, but it seems odd for a man so obviously enjoying his work to suddenly switch off this creative impulse. And for someone who made such a significant contribution to both posters and magazines from the later Victorian era and well into the 20th century, Georges Meunier remains unfathomably obscure. The French are usually quite assiduous about remembrance of their illustrative past, but even in French sources there is only a pitifully small amount of information. Maybe his refusal to be typecast somehow undermined his reputation, or possibly the obvious influence of Rire on his early posters. But I'm pleased that at least I did find a reasonable amount of his work to show you, and here's some more which I hope reinforces my opinion that he deserves a much higher place in the pantheon of Golden Age illustrators.